What if the quietest kid in class was actually the smartest? When Elijah Brooks was put on the spot, his classmates expected him to fail. Instead, they watched in awe as he solved an impossible problem with ease. This is the story of a hidden genius who refused to stay in the shadows. The afternoon sun filtered through the large windows of Roosevelt Middle School, casting long golden beams onto the scuffed linoleum floors. The air buzzed with the restless energy of eighth graders, books slamming shut, pencils tapping on desks, whispered jokes exchanged in hurried bursts before the lesson began. At the back of room 204, near the window, Elijah Brooks sat in his usual seat, chin resting lightly on his hand as he gazed outside. A cool autumn breeze rustled the trees, their amber and gold leaves swirling in lazy patterns before settling on the sidewalk below. While his classmates were focused on their conversations, Elijah's mind was elsewhere, deep in the world of numbers, equations, and puzzles only he could see. To the outside world, Elijah appeared distracted, distant even. He was a quiet boy, not one to raise his hand or offer answers when teachers posed questions. His grades were excellent, but he rarely spoke unless directly called upon. It was easier that way. What no one knew, what no one had ever really paid attention to, was that Elijah was more than just a bright student. He was a mathematical prodigy. Numbers were his refuge. They made sense in a way that people didn't. While others found math frustrating or tedious, to Elijah it was like music, a language of logic and patterns that unfolded naturally in his mind. He saw numbers not as obstacles but as a game, a puzzle to be solved. He worked through complex equations in the margins of his notebook, quietly challenging himself beyond the simple problems assigned in class. But he never flaunted it. Being unnoticed was easier, safer. At the front of the classroom, Ms. Catherine Holloway, the 8th grade math teacher, stood with a commanding presence. She was a woman in her 40s, with a sharp gaze and an air of no-nonsense authority. She wasn't the type to tolerate laziness or mediocrity. And today, as she flipped through a stack of graded math tests, she was not impressed. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Too many low scores, too many careless mistakes. She wanted her students to do better, to think, to push themselves. And then she reached a paper that made her pause. 100%. A perfect score. Elijah Brooks. Ms. Holloway looked up from the test, her gaze landing on the quiet boy near the window. His test scores had always been exceptional, yet he never engaged in class. He never spoke up. It was as if he was hiding in plain sight, and today she wasn't going to let that slide. She cleared her throat. "All right, everyone, settle down." The murmur of conversations faded, replaced by the faint shuffling of students adjusting in their seats. Ms. Holloway held up the stack of papers. These test results were disappointing. A few students groaned. They knew what was coming. "Right? Some of you clearly weren't paying attention to the material we've been covering for weeks. Algebra is not optional. It's the foundation of everything you'll need in high school and beyond." She started handing back tests, pausing occasionally to offer brief feedback. "Decent work. Needs improvement. See me after class." When she reached Elijah's desk, she didn't speak. Instead, she placed his test in front of him, the bright red 100% circled at the top. Elijah glanced at it, then quickly flipped it over before anyone could see. He didn't want the attention. Ms. Holloway, however, had other plans. "Elijah?" His head snapped up. The room went silent. Elijah felt every eye in the classroom turn toward him. A few students exchanged smirks, while others waited, curious. He rarely spoke. This was new. Ms. Holloway crossed her arms. "Since you seem more interested in staring out the window than paying attention to my lesson, why don't you come up here and solve something for us?" His stomach clenched. He hadn't been staring out the window because he was distracted. He had already finished the day's assignment in his head before the lesson even began. But how could he explain that? How could he tell them that his mind worked faster than the class moved? The room filled with muffled snickers. They thought she was about to embarrass him. Ms. Holloway turned to the board and picked up a marker. With quick, deliberate strokes, she wrote an advanced algebra problem across the whiteboard, a problem far beyond what the class had covered. When she stepped back, a few students murmured, "That's not fair." She's setting him up to fail. He's gonna freeze. Ms. Holloway didn't address them. She turned back to Elijah, holding out the marker. Go ahead, she said. Show us what you know. The classroom fell into an uneasy silence. Elijah's heart pounded. He could feel the heat of everyone's stares. He glanced at the equation. It wasn't just a test. It was a challenge. He had two choices, step up or step back. For a fleeting moment he considered shaking his head, sitting back down, letting them believe whatever they wanted about him. That he wasn't special. That he was just another quiet kid. But something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. He took a deep breath. Then he stood up, walked to the front of the room, and took the marker. The moment Elijah Brooks reached the front of the room, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers stopped. The laughter died down. All that remained was the quiet hum of anticipation, a collective curiosity hanging in the air. Ms. Catherine Holloway stepped aside, watching him closely, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The equation on the board was no simple problem. It was a deliberate challenge, something she expected only the brightest students to attempt, let alone solve. Elijah stood there, marker in hand, staring at the numbers in front of him. The weight of expectation. From behind him, students exchanged amused glances. They were waiting for him to fail. He doesn't even know where to start, one student whispered. I bet he just got lucky on that test, another muttered, stifling a laugh. Elijah heard them all, every doubt, every whispered remark. But instead of rattling him, something shifted inside. For years he had chosen to stay in the background, to blend in, to let his talent go unnoticed because being seen meant being questioned, being different. But now he had no choice. He took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and lifted the marker. The numbers come alive. At first his strokes were slow and careful, testing, feeling out the problem. The equation was complex, but his mind worked faster than his hands. He saw the steps before he wrote them down, the patterns forming in his head like pieces of a puzzle snapping into place. The first number appeared, then another, then a symbol. He moved with more confidence, faster, more precise. The classroom, which had moments ago been buzzing with low murmurs, fell completely silent. One by one, students leaned forward, their skepticism slowly shifting to something else, disbelief. Wait, a voice murmured from the back. Is he actually doing it? No way. Elijah, fully focused, ignored them all. His movements became fluid, instinctive. His mind worked through each layer of the equation, breaking it apart, rearranging it, stripping it down to its simplest form. Step by step, he filled the board with numbers, symbols, and solutions. The squeak of the marker was the only sound in the room. The teacher watches in astonishment. Ms. Holloway's eyes narrowed as she followed his work. She had expected hesitation, maybe even a mistake. Instead, what she saw was clarity, precision. Elijah wasn't just solving the problem. He was dismantling it with the ease of someone far beyond an 8th grade level. She took a small step forward, her lips slightly parted. She knew what she was witnessing. This wasn't a student stumbling through an equation. This was brilliance. The other students had noticed too. One boy, who had been smirking earlier, now had his mouth slightly open. Another student nudged his friend, whispering, "I don't even understand what he's doing." And then Elijah reached the final step. His marker slowed. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. He wrote the final number, circled it, and then capped the marker with a soft click. The silence breaks. For a few heartbeats, no one spoke. Elijah turned to face the class, his palms sweating. His classmates stared at him, their faces frozen in various states of shock. Then the silence cracked. Someone clapped, just once. Then again. And then suddenly the classroom erupted into applause. Students who had never spoken to Elijah before were cheering, clapping, shaking their heads in amazement. Even the ones who had doubted him, the ones who had whispered behind his back, now looked at him differently. A few called out, "Dude, that was insane. How did you even do that? Are you like a genius or something?" Elijah's face burned, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was from something new, something unfamiliar. The teacher's verdict. Ms. Holloway took a step toward the board, her sharp eyes scanning every line of his work. She checked each step, her fingers tracing the numbers as if searching for an error. There was none. Finally, she turned to him, her expression softer than before. "This," she said slowly, almost as if she were still processing it. "This is correct." Another round of whispers spread through the room. Elijah swallowed, gripping the marker tightly. He knew he had done it right. But hearing her say it, that made it real. Ms. Holloway studied him for a long moment before finally asking, "Why haven't you spoken up before?" Elijah hesitated. His gaze dropped to the floor. How could he explain? How could he tell them that standing out felt dangerous? That being noticed often meant being judged, being misunderstood? Chapter 3. A New Perspective. The classroom was still buzzing as Elijah made his way back to his seat. The applause had faded, but the energy lingered, a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and curiosity. For the first time, Elijah felt visible, not because of a mistake, not because someone was calling him out, but because he had done something that no one expected. The class sees him differently. As he slid into his chair, he could feel the weight of his classmates' stares, but they weren't mocking this time. Instead, there were wide-eyed glances, nudges between friends, quiet murmurs. A girl from the front row turned around in her seat. "How did you do that?" she asked, her voice laced with genuine wonder. Elijah hesitated. He wasn't used to people asking him questions, and he definitely wasn't used to people actually listening to his answers. "I just saw the answer," he said quietly, staring down at his notebook. "Saw it?" Another boy cut in, raising an eyebrow. "Man, that wasn't just seeing it. That was some straight-up math wizard stuff." Laughter, not cruel but amazed. More voices chimed in. "Dude, do you study all the time? Are you some kind of genius? Can you teach me how to do that?" Elijah's face grew warm. He had never been asked for help before. People usually ignored him, or assumed he was just another quiet kid with nothing to say. Now they wanted to hear him, to learn from him. It was overwhelming, but it also felt good. Ms. Holloway's change of heart. At the front of the classroom, Ms. Holloway leaned against her desk, still staring at the equation on the board. For a long time, she had assumed Elijah's silence meant disinterest, that he was just another student who floated through class, neither excelling nor failing. But now she saw him differently. She had underestimated him. She had been wrong. Taking a deep breath, she straightened up and addressed the class. "What you just saw today," she said, her voice carrying across the room, "is proof that talent doesn't always look the way we expect it to." She glanced toward Elijah, her expression softening. And sometimes the quietest students have the loudest minds. Elijah felt a strange pressure in his chest. Recognition, something he had never experienced before. She saw him, really saw him. The bell rings, but the attention doesn't fade. When the final bell rang, signaling the end of the period, the students started packing up their things. But even as they shuffled toward the door, the whispers continued. A few kids patted Elijah on the shoulder as they passed. "That was wild, man. Respect. For real, you're smart as hell. I gotta sit next to you during the next test." Elijah barely knew how to react. He had spent so much of his life trying to blend in. Now, blending in wasn't an option anymore. An unexpected conversation. As Elijah tucked his notebook into his backpack, Ms. Holloway's voice stopped him. "Elijah, can you stay for a moment?" He froze. For a split second, he panicked. Had he done something wrong? Was she mad that he hadn't spoken up before? Taking a deep breath, he nodded and walked toward her desk as the last few students filtered out. Ms. Holloway studied him for a moment before speaking. "I owe you an apology." Elijah blinked. "An apology?" She nodded. "I misjudged you," she admitted, folding her arms. "I thought your silence meant you didn't care about learning. But today, you proved me wrong." Elijah shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. "I didn't mean to," he started, but she shook her head. "No, Elijah. You don't have to explain yourself. But I do want to ask you something." She leaned forward slightly. "Why don't you speak up more?" Elijah hesitated. How was he supposed to explain it? That it was easier to go unnoticed? That being smart sometimes made people treat you differently? That he had learned a long time ago that it was safer to just stay quiet? Finally, he shrugged. I didn't think anyone noticed. Ms. Holloway's face softened. Well, she said gently, it's time for that to change. As Elijah walked out of the classroom, he felt different, lighter, seen. For years he had believed that fading into the background was the safest place to be. But now he wasn't so sure. The hallways of Roosevelt Middle School were buzzing as students rushed to their next class, but Elijah walked in a daze. Everything felt different. The math problem, the applause. Ms. Holloway's words, it's time for that to change. Elijah had spent years slipping between the cracks, his talent hidden in the margins of his notebook. Now the whole class knew. And Ms. Holloway? She saw him, really saw him. But what did that mean? That afternoon, as the final bell rang and students poured out of classrooms, Elijah gathered his things and started toward the exit. Elijah, wait up! He turned to see Ms. Holloway standing by her desk, her expression unreadable. I want to talk to you about something. Elijah swallowed hard and nodded. He stepped forward, gripping the strap of his backpack as she motioned for him to sit. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she folded her arms and studied him. You have a gift, she said finally, her voice steady, and I don't want to see you waste it. Elijah's throat felt dry. He started, but she held up a hand. Let me finish, she said. There's a program, a district-wide advanced math initiative. It's designed for students who need more of a challenge. It's after school twice a week, and I think you'd be a perfect fit. Elijah froze. An advanced program? For students like him? Like him? For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on him. He had spent so long keeping his abilities to himself, scribbling equations in secret. Could he really step into a space where he belonged? Elijah's hands clenched around his backpack straps. Do you think I'm good enough for that? He asked, his voice quieter than he intended. Ms. Holloway gave him a look that bordered on disbelief. Elijah, you solved a problem today that most high school students would struggle with. She shook her head. You're not just good enough. You belong there. Her words sent a ripple through him. Belong. It was such a simple word, but it held so much weight. Still, doubt clung to him like a shadow. What if he wasn't as smart as she thought? What if this was a mistake? But then he thought about the moment at the board. The way the numbers had clicked into place. The way the room had fallen silent. The way his classmates had looked at him differently. Not with ridicule, but with respect. Maybe he could do this. Maybe he wanted to. That evening, Elijah sat at the small wooden table in his family's modest kitchen, his math notebook in front of him. The smell of dinner filled the air, but his mind was somewhere else. Across from him, his mother was stirring a pot on the stove while his father read the newspaper, his glasses perched low on his nose. Elijah cleared his throat. Ms. Holloway wants me to join an advanced math program. His mother turned, wooden spoon still in hand. An advanced program? His father lowered the newspaper, his eyes sharp with interest. Elijah nodded. She said it's for students who need more of a challenge. His mother smiled, her eyes shining. Oh, baby, that's wonderful. His father leaned forward, his expression serious but proud. And what do you think? He asked. Elijah hesitated. I don't know, he admitted. I mean, what if I can't keep up? What if I'm not as smart as she thinks? His mother set the spoon down and walked over, resting a gentle hand on his shoulder. Elijah, we've always known you were special. I'm just glad other people are finally seeing it too. His father nodded. Son, this isn't the finish line, it's the starting point. Elijah swallowed hard. They believed in him. Maybe it was time he believed in himself too. Later that night, Elijah sat in his room staring at his notebook. Numbers had always felt like a safe place. They made sense. They followed rules. They never judged. But stepping into something new? Something bigger? That was terrifying. Still, he thought about the feeling he had today. Not just solving the problem, but being seen, being recognized. He picked up his pencil and flipped to a fresh page. At the top, in small, careful letters, he wrote, What happens if I try? Then, he circled the words. Because for the first time in his life, Elijah wasn't afraid of the answer. Tomorrow, he would tell Ms. Holloway his decision. He was ready. The next day, as Elijah walked into Ms. Holloway's classroom, his heart pounded. His notebook felt heavier than usual in his hands. This was it. He had made his decision. Ms. Holloway stood at her desk, flipping through a stack of papers as students filed in. When she noticed Elijah approaching, she raised an eyebrow. He took a deep breath. "I want to do it," he said, his voice steady. She set the papers down and folded her arms, studying him. "Good," she said with a small smile. "I already sent your name to the program director. Your first class is next week." Elijah blinked. "Wait, you already signed me up?" She smirked. "I had a feeling you'd come around." A flicker of something warm spread through him. She believed in him. Maybe it was time he did too. A new beginning. The following Monday, Elijah found himself standing in front of an unfamiliar classroom. The sign outside read, "Advanced Mathematics and Problem Solving." The moment felt surreal. This was nothing like his usual 8th grade math class. Through the door's small window, he saw students already at their desks, scribbling in notebooks, some working through complex equations, others debating solutions with each other. They weren't whispering. They weren't teasing. They were excited about math. For the first time in his life, Elijah felt like he was standing at the door of a world where he belonged. He inhaled deeply and stepped inside. An unexpected challenge. The moment he sat down, he realized something immediately. This was different. Very different. The problems on the whiteboard weren't just a step above what he had seen before. They were leaps ahead. For a split second, doubt gripped him. Am I in over my head? The instructor, a tall man with glasses and a kind but serious demeanor, introduced himself. "Welcome, students. This isn't just another math class. Here, we challenge the way you think." He gestured toward the board. "Who wants to try this problem?" Elijah tensed as hands shot up around the room. These kids weren't afraid. They were eager. A girl near the front was called on. She walked to the board and began solving the problem at lightning speed. Elijah's eyes widened. "She's fast." The boy next to him leaned over and whispered, "That's Maya. She's the best one here. Won last year's math championship." Elijah swallowed hard. What if I can't keep up? But then he noticed something. Maya wasn't just solving the problem. She was breaking it down. Step by step, piece by piece. Just like he did. That flicker of doubt inside him shifted into something else. Determination. He could do this, and he would do this. Halfway through class, the instructor handed out a challenge worksheet. 10 problems. No calculators. Elijah's palms were sweaty as he scanned the page. For the first time in a long time, he felt something he wasn't used to feeling in math. Uncertainty. These problems weren't just tough. They were brutal. Around him, pencils scratched against paper as the other students got to work. Elijah's grip tightened on his pencil. Then slowly he began. At first it was slow. He hesitated, second-guessed himself. But then, like always, the numbers started making sense. Piece by piece, step by step. Time blurred. When the instructor finally called time, Elijah had completed 8 out of the 10 problems. He exhaled, feeling exhausted but strangely energized. The instructor collected the papers, nodding in approval. "Good work, everyone. We'll go over these next time." Elijah slumped back in his chair, his mind still buzzing. He hadn't finished, but he had competed. And for now, that was enough. After class, as he packed his things, Maya walked over to him. "Hey," she said, tucking her notebook under her arm. "You're new, right?" Elijah nodded. "Yeah, first day." She smirked. "Not bad. 8 out of 10. Most kids who start here barely get past 5. Elijah's eyebrows lifted. "Really?" She nodded. "You're good. Keep up and you might actually be a challenge." Elijah let out a short laugh, surprised at the friendly competition in her voice. As he walked out of the classroom, he realized something. He wasn't out of place here. This was where he was meant to be, and this was just the beginning. Elijah had always known he was good at math. But now he wasn't just good, he was proving himself. The weeks passed in a blur of numbers and challenges. Every Monday and Thursday he stepped into the advanced math class and pushed himself further than ever before. At first he struggled to keep up with the pace, but every night he sat at the kitchen table, solving extra problems, studying new concepts, challenging himself in ways he never had before. And soon something changed. He wasn't just keeping up. He was excelling. One day during their weekly challenge round, the instructor put up an especially difficult problem. The class fell into silence as the students stared at it, pencils tapping against desks. Even Maya, the reigning math champion, hesitated before beginning. Elijah's eyes flickered with recognition. He knew this. Before he could second-guess himself, he picked up his pencil and started writing. His mind worked quickly, breaking down the equation, isolating the variables, simplifying step by step. The numbers felt familiar, like puzzle pieces snapping into place. When he finished, he glanced around, only to realize that he was the first one done. Maya, still deep in thought, glanced up and saw him set his pencil down. Her eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise. Slowly, others started finishing. The instructor walked around, checking their work. When he reached Elijah's paper, he paused. His eyes flicked over the solution, then back at Elijah. Then he smiled. Perfect. The class murmured. Maya leaned over, glancing at his paper, then smirked. Not bad, newbie. Elijah grinned, a quiet confidence settling inside him. He had spent so much time doubting himself. But here in this room he didn't need to doubt. He belonged. At his regular school things had changed too. Elijah wasn't invisible anymore. The students who once ignored him now saw him in a different light. Yo, Elijah, can you help me with my math homework? A boy from his class asked one morning. How do you do that thing with exponents again? A girl chimed in. Even the kids who had laughed when he first stood at the board now looked at him with respect. At first it felt strange. For so long he had hidden his talent, unsure if he wanted the attention. But now he realized something. His gift wasn't just his own. Helping others, showing them how to think through problems, watching their faces light up when they finally understood. It felt good. And for the first time, Elijah started to think that maybe, just maybe, this was what he was meant to do. One afternoon, as class ended, Ms. Holloway called Elijah over. How's the advanced program going? She asked. Elijah shrugged, but there was a hint of a smile on his face. It's good. Ms. Holloway smirked. Just good? I hear you're turning some heads over there. Elijah rubbed the back of his neck. I guess. She studied him for a moment, then handed him a flyer. Elijah glanced down at it. Regional math competition? Your name was recommended, Ms. Holloway said. It's a statewide event and only the best students get invited. I think you should go for it. Elijah's stomach flipped. A competition. He had never done something like that before. Think about it, Ms. Holloway said, as if sensing his hesitation. I believe in you, Elijah, and I think you're ready. Elijah nodded slowly, tucking the flyer into his backpack. He didn't know if he was ready. But something inside him told him to try. And this time, he wouldn't let doubt hold him back. Elijah sat at the kitchen table, the flyer for the regional math competition lying in front of him. His fingers traced the bold letters at the top, his mind racing with thoughts. A competition. A chance to prove himself. Not just to Ms. Holloway, not just to his classmates, but to himself. But the thought of standing in front of a crowd, competing against students from all over the state, made his stomach twist. Everything okay, son? His father's voice pulled him from his thoughts. Elijah looked up to see both his parents watching him, concern in their eyes. I got invited to a math competition, he admitted. His mother's face lit up. That's amazing. His father leaned forward, nodding. That's a big deal, Elijah. What's on your mind? Elijah hesitated. I don't know if I should do it. His mother frowned. Why not? Elijah exhaled, rubbing his hands together. I mean, what if I mess up? What if I'm not as good as the other kids? His father's expression softened. Elijah, do you remember the first time I taught you how to ride a bike? Elijah blinked, caught off guard. Yeah. You fell a couple of times, his father said with a small smile. You scraped your knee. You almost gave up. But then, his mother chimed in, you got back on. And soon enough you were racing down the street like you'd been riding forever. His father nodded. You're going to feel nervous, son. That's normal. But don't let fear stop you from trying. You belong in this competition. From trying. You belong in this competition. Elijah looked down at the flyer again. Maybe they were right. Maybe it was time to see what he was truly capable of. He took a deep breath, then met their eyes. I'll do it. The regional math competition was held in a massive conference hall in downtown Atlanta. Rows of tables lined the room, each with a student sitting upright, pencils at the ready. The energy in the air was electric, nervous, excited, competitive. Elijah walked in with his team, heart pounding in his chest. The other students looked confident, experienced. Some were flipping through notes, others whispering equations under their breath. For a moment, doubt crept in. Did he really belong here? Then he caught sight of Ms. Holloway. She stood at the edge of the room watching him with a nod of encouragement. His parents had told him he was ready. Ms. Holloway believed in him. Now, he had to believe in himself. Taking a deep breath, he sat down at his assigned table. The competition began. The first round was individual work, each competitor solving a set of complex problems within a time limit. Elijah's eyes scanned the first question. He recognized the pattern immediately. His pencil hit the paper, and suddenly, everything else faded away. The numbers, the calculations, the logic. It all clicked into place, just like it always did in his mind. One question down, then another. Confidence grew with each solution. By the time the timer rang, signaling the end of the round, Elijah had completed every question. The second round was a team challenge. Elijah and his teammates worked together, bouncing ideas off each other, racing against the clock. For the first time, Elijah wasn't just solving problems. He was leading, guiding his teammates toward the right answers. By the final round, he was on fire. The competition ended and the judges tallied the scores. Elijah sat with his team, his legs bouncing under the table. Around him, students whispered nervously. Finally, a man stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. And now, for our top scorers, Elijah held his breath. Third place goes to Maya Thompson. A girl from another school stood beaming as she accepted her medal. Second place goes to Jordan Phillips. Another student walked up, shaking the judge's hand. Elijah's palms were sweaty. And in first place, with a near-perfect score, Elijah Brooks. The room exploded into applause. For a moment, Elijah didn't move. Then, as reality set in, he slowly stood, his heart hammering. He walked to the stage, the lights shining brightly in his eyes, the medal placed around his neck. From the crowd, he heard Ms. Holloway clapping loudly along with his teammates. But most importantly, he spotted his parents standing in the back, beaming with pride. His mother wiped a tear from her eye. His father nodded, his expression full of unspoken words. As Elijah held the medal in his hands, he realized something. This wasn't just about winning. It was about proving to himself that he could. And he had. The weight of the gold medal still hung around Elijah's neck as he walked out of the competition hall, his heart full in a way he had never felt before. The cool autumn breeze brushed against his skin, grounding him in the moment. His parents were waiting just outside, their faces glowing with pride. "You did it, son," his father said, pulling him into a firm hug. His mother, tears still glistening in her eyes, cupped his face. "I always knew you had something special in you. But seeing the world recognize it, that's a whole different kind of joy." Elijah smiled, glancing down at the medal resting against his chest. For the first time, he truly believed in himself. A few feet away, Ms. Holloway approached, her arms crossed, but her expression softer than he had ever seen. "You impressed a lot of people today, Elijah," she said, "including me." Elijah felt a warmth spread through his chest. If anyone had doubted him before, if anyone had underestimated his ability, today had proven them wrong. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice quieter, as if speaking his thoughts aloud. Ms. Holloway smiled. "That depends on you. There are more competitions, more advanced programs. I even know a few high schools that would love to have a student like you in their accelerated math track." Elijah's eyes widened. A bigger challenge, a bigger world. Could he do it? Looking back at his parents, his father standing strong beside him, his mother's love shining through every word, he knew the answer. Yes. The next Monday at Roosevelt Middle School, everything felt different. Elijah had walked these halls 100 times before, but now it wasn't the same. People noticed him. His classmates, the same ones who had once dismissed him as just the quiet kid in the back, were now curious, interested, even admiring. "Yo, Elijah, you really won that whole competition?" one student asked at lunch. "Yeah," Elijah said, a little hesitant. "Man, that's crazy. You gotta show me how you do it sometime." Another classmate grinned. "So, when's the next one? You gonna go for another gold?" Elijah chuckled, shaking his head. He hadn't even thought about that yet. But one thing was clear. He wasn't invisible anymore. And for the first time, he liked being seen. Ms. Holloway saw the change too. She no longer just saw one math prodigy in her classroom. She saw students who had been inspired by Elijah's success. Students who once doubted their own abilities now asked more questions. They tried a little harder. One day, a boy named Marcus, who had struggled in math all year, stayed after class. "Ms. Holloway, do you think I could get better at this?" he asked, his voice low, uncertain. Ms. Holloway glanced at Elijah, who had stayed behind to review a problem. "I think anyone can," she said, nodding toward Elijah, "as long as they believe in themselves." Marcus looked at Elijah, hesitant. "You ever struggle with this stuff?" he asked. Elijah smiled, remembering all the times he had hidden his love for math, afraid of what people might say. "Yeah," he admitted, "I just never let it stop me." Marcus nodded slowly. "Maybe I should stop letting it stop me too." And just like that, the cycle had begun. One person's confidence had given another a reason to believe. A few weeks later, Elijah sat at home staring at a new flyer. National Math Tournament, open to all advanced students. He grinned. This time there was no doubt, no hesitation. He was ready. "Mom," he called out, "I think I know what I want to do next." His mother walked in, raising an eyebrow. "Oh? And what's that?" Elijah looked at the flyer one last time before setting it down. "Win another one. Sometimes all it takes is one chance, one moment for the world to see who you really are." Elijah Brooks had always been extraordinary. But on the day he picked up that marker in front of his classmates, he finally let the world see it too. And that was only the beginning. Because when you believe in yourself, the world has no choice but to believe in you too. This story is a reminder that hidden talent is everywhere. Sometimes all a person needs is the right moment to shine. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories of resilience, hidden brilliance, and the power of self-belief. Because you might just be someone the world is waiting to notice.